dying itself either. I'm just giving you a heads up that this microphone is playing up, so keep an eye on it. Okay, I'm going to keep cracking anyway. We'll see how the microphone goes. So welcome to our Audit and Risk Committee today. As I communicated with our committee last night, our chair, Bruce, was called to a meeting with the local government minister at the last minute, and he was So we're going to go to page 5, which is our minutes. Thank you, Coral, for the minutes. Any comments or queries in regards to these minutes? Councillor Foster, try your microphone. Let's see how it goes.
I'll try. Yeah, no, it's just a clarification. It's just a typo, but I wouldn't normally worry about typos, but it could. The next message, it's on page 9, 5, improvements in public transport such as a smart car system. Shouldn't it be smart card?
Yep. Just a E missing. It's not smart card. Smart card. Smart card, not car, not a vehicle, a card. Thanks for that, Councillor Foster. Yes, it is quite different. Any other questions or queries? If not, do I have a mover for these minutes? Councillor Sheldrake, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Foster. All in favour? Dean, do you want to talk to the first one, please?
Yes, I can provide an update on that. Signed the agreement to CIP exterior contract, so all our milestones have been often under the design and build.
Thank you. Any leave of absence and acknowledge and tribute. I just want to acknowledge Councillor Sheldrake for the wonderful award. Tukumaru Bay community, and I want to I was there yesterday and looked at the devastation, and it is on the ground, the support that they've received. I want to acknowledge Councillor Burnett and Councillor Seymour also for digging in on Monday, shovels up, helping out there. That community feedback I could see yesterday. But
Okay, the microphone's off. Oh, okay, cool. So that's what hopefully Dave and Kieran, when they zoom in a second, we'll be able to explain in perhaps in greater detail what how we've managed that. But really, that's the other assumption that we've indicated is around the sort of the looming local government reform, and just indicating that our expectation is during the course of this long-term plan, we're not likely to see any major changes from that in the earlier part of the next long-term plan, and certainly our next long-term plan will have to incorporate the impacts of all those significant changes that will likely come from the reforms.
Tim, I have a question of you, and this will not, so the Waka Kotahi, they've been signalling in the last 2-3 weeks about their funding. But it is quite concerning that in such a late stage for all of us, this is not just Gisborne District Council that got a reduced amount offered of what was originally available. I know they're also tightening their belts, but it's really concerning that we received that information so late in a 10-year plan process. And I'm speaking on behalf of every mayor in New Zealand, because they would all have been at the same boat as us, trying to scramble to get your auditors ready to sign off your 10-year plan by the 30th of June. So aside from the fact that we are we
Oh, it is working. Yes, I think you're right. That one could that was the
So the process that we have, we adopt at a point in time and we make up most of the assumptions and most of the changes. And based on that, we refer
with our bribery, fraud and corruption policy. So councillors, you know, we have seen this before. We've spoken about this before and made a few recommendations, which I see staff has taken into account. I do have a few notes from Bruce. He sent extensive notes overnight. So any questions while I get my Bruce's notes ready? Any questions from staff? Mal, do you want to join us? Thanks a lot. Anything you would like to in regards to this report?
So, just clarify on just about what that actually means. So, in that situation, we may be a conflict of interest, say, for example, with the that case, it would be directed through to the chair of the investigation. That's what that paragraph is.
Good, yes, because this was one of Bruce's questions, but page 24,115 under procedures, Chair of RC and the Mayor is informed. I'm quite uncertain what is intended here. So that is when the CEO might be the person that we investigate, then you won't be dealing with her, or HR will then be dealing with the head of audit and risk and the Mayor. Correct. Good. Thank you for that. Any other questions in regards to this policy? Quite straightforward. Councillor Cranston.
Yeah, probably under red flags and that, just our ability to anticipate. Are we doing any work in the digital space at the moment? Thinking about what happened at Waikato and that, there's a lot of corruption sort of things that can happen in the digital space. And I think we need to get in front of that, and it's not mentioned in the red flags. And I think that's probably an area that we do need to put a bit of focus in because it's quite threatening.
So James, remember when I touched base with you after the Waikato DHB hack, and you sent that information through to me, which I sent through to the committee. Councillor Cranston is just asking how prepared we are and how confident we feel in regards to possible cyber type of attacks, stuff like that.
Not necessarily external, it can be internal.
Yes, so we get a number of safeguards. I think we're quite different from the experience that they have had in Waikato, is that we've got things like multi-factor authentication, which are some of those key frontline defence things that people should have in place. I've had assurances from our IT team that we've got all the bases that we should have covered. But as you well know, hackers are very creative people, and if we're ever in the line of fire, and councils have had some experiences. There's some other things that we're doing in the future too, just to sort of future-proof us as well from cyber security and cyber attacks.
Thank you, Mr. Bakey.
Yeah, I think it's probably in that red flag space where would there be something that might give a red flag for something happening in that digital space, and we need to identify that because we've got a whole list of red flags here, but there's nothing about IT. just
on page 27, stuff that we need to look out for when we might see bribery and corruption red flags. And Councillor Cranston is just alluding there, are there some red flags that
if you get an email saying, please approve the $2 million transaction for Nadine Thatcher Swan, I suggest you flag that with IT. So yeah, you'll get email phishing is a really big one. And that's how a lot of these things get into organisations. So emails that give the appearance that they're legitimate. Yeah, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. Yeah, but we've got like our Mimecast in place. So all those very annoying systems that people get upset about that are blocking your emails, they're there for a reason.
was description of green flags and encouragement of policy applied to the we put in support of by how we live. Even though it is in law not. Any other questions before we finish?
I guess on that note, thank you. I was going to ask it again. We laptop computer such. So in an action space, being transparent and clear, we are living up to those. Should we have our devices checked or considered, to be, sure that we're not looking up sites that are considered, etc.
You are checked, Meredith.
Yeah, well, I know that our phones and everything's monitored these days, and even knows where I am, all that. But for the public to be aware that we are trying to be as what's the word, transparent, but as honest and ethical in all ways. I'm just asking because again you do get a suspect email in respect to it and all of that. But would that be an action point? I know that other mechanisms, police, etc., have their own, IT people, specialists that look into their computers, etc., to see what people are accessing. Is that an action point that we should consider too?
If you have a work device, we can access what you're looking at anyway. So for our staff, we know we can see their history and what they've been looking at too. So and as elected members, your emails, everything is
Discoverable. So there are checks in place and it can be checked. So this fraud, bribery and corruption policy moved by Councillor Wharehinga, seconded by Councillor Faulkner. All in favour, contrary, carried. Thanks a lot for that. Thank you, Nadine. And this will now be socialised with staff.
Just a question of process. Yeah, I was just going to ask that.
Seconded by Councillor Seymour. All in favour, contrary, carried. Thank you for that, Councillor Seymour. It slipped my mind. Okay, next we move to our risk and risk appetite progress report, which we had several workshops with, which were very interesting to see how our risk have changed since we had COVID, or not our risk, our perception of risk. Very interesting exercise and still ongoing work as alluded to in here. Steve, welcome. We'll try and see if this microphone works. Yeah, the floor is yours, and then we will have some questions. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Worship. Kia ora koutou. So this report, yes, this is part of the wider ongoing process of risk. Identify what we consider.
And I might be reading it wrong, but so if I'm looking at page 30, which has 6 black, or highlighted bold risks. And then if you look at the pages from that exercise that we did the other day, the first one, 40, is headed following risks are used as basis. And then we go to the conversations and the identification of what was risks. And they don't seem to be consistent, the ones that have been prioritised in some of those pages. And I would have thought that health and safety in an organisation like this is really important, and legal compliance, because everything we have has a potential legal impact, whereas overall council strategy is something that is part of the total operations of the organisation. So if you're going to say there are 5 strategic risks and there's 6 involved, what level of priority do those ones get as opposed to 7 and 8 and 9 that are not bold? Because it's pretty hard, I think, to distinguish some of those risks. So can management please tell me what difference in resource or whatever you're going to apply to the first 5 as opposed to the rest?
So the table on page 6, following workshops and those audit risks have been reprioritised on the right hand side to 13 risks. And as that's today, councillors have identified the top 5 organisational risks as listed. That's not to say that health and safety and legal compliance relevance. They still maintain focus, and various managers within council still need to maintain what the list says is that what we need to do today is start top 5 risks and put those through this consequence matrix, see whether or not our risk mitigations relevant. So our first cab off the rank in terms of putting these new risks through the consequence matrix. The others will follow and focus over the next what will happen is each of those risks is if we find that the obligations we have in place currently to manage those risks no longer meet council risk appetite, we would then need to come back and demonstrate what additional mitigations will be taken to manage those risks, or if further resources required to ensure those risks are managed.
I think that didn't really answer my question, short of telling me you're going to do 5 now and 5 later. What level of priority, I mean, I can see there in that order, but of what level of resource was what I asked, were going to be given to ones in the second, in the less bold, health and safety and legal compliance, which are absolutely critical to this organisation, I would have thought. I certainly do.
So the other pages kind of cluster where everyone agreed or where dots. And that's not to say that those weren't a priority, but there was a general feel that those were covered adequately. So the risks there, which has high as the other ones that have been priority. Again, that's not to say that they're not risks, but in the conversation about on balance, the focus should be here. This is a dynamic space, so it's not going to be set depending on where we are at.
the other might need more input in order to get them where we feel comfortable that the associated risks are covered by mitigation factors. My assumption is correct.
Yes, the other part of it was that the first part was a management view. The second part is where you found as elected members.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I did want to ask about on page 32, 17, 18, 19, talk about the risk appetites is moderate and minor, and that you've chosen to go with a moderate kind of risk appetite across all of those risk areas. And I get that it will be more clear and straightforward and understandable from regards to staff being able to put a lens over. From a risk governance perspective, I had kind of thought that wouldn't it be better to go to the more less risk kind of end and actually apply a minor risk appetite over the lot? If you could just explain in regards to risk. I get in terms of the operationalizing and the standardizing, but in terms of the picking moderate over minor, when minor in terms of the governance steer, I think would probably be the more palatable. Are you able to talk to me about the rationale around choosing moderate that's not operationalizing, that's spoken in here?
Through the chair, yes. So moderate was chosen to provide some consistency as we applied the matrix to each of those 30 risks. And you might find that some of those strategic risks may land on the minors, as that's the level of risk that can be perceived. So as a starting point, we are using moderate to assess each of the 13 risks. And depending on how those risks come through the matrix, each of those risks may end up on a different point. So right, that yes, some of those risks may be considered more at a minor level, as the level of risk that we perceived. But in terms of getting the process started, we are using the model. And that level tended to emerge from that the minor risks in the original table that was put forward needed to move up closer to that model. And that reflects lower risk. Councillors were prepared to accept lower level of risk.
Yeah, yes, I do get that, and I did read that in the report. That did come clearly through the report in regards to the rationale around, like I said, operationalizing the via minor versus moderate. Why not operationalize across all of them minor?
But in some cases, may not be able to mitigate this coverage. And so what we're trying to say, we can manage those risks and these things, and the lowest impact is possible. But how do we manage it?
Okay, awesome. Yeah, thank you, Pauline. That makes complete sense to me. In regards to paragraph 19, it says there are two options to consider: use the original risk consequence matrix or recalibrate the consequences. So they fall consistently across the different categories. When I read that, I thought that was already done according to the report, but then reading that paragraph 90 made me think that there was going to be a future decision about recalibrating or use the original risk. It sounds like recalibration is already occurring.
Yes, that's right. So we could have used the original consequence matrix that was done back in 2020, but that was indicating that councils accept a higher level of risk than shown they will accept. So recalibration has already been done. It's attachment 3 to the report, and that has a lower level of risk tolerance as a result. That lower level of risk tolerance.
So thank you there, Steve. I was just checking to make sure that there wasn't going to be another recalibration because I thought that the recalibration had already been done. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, just a little bit of clarification on page 40 on box number 6 under financial. It says if we do run our budget process effectively, then we may not be financially sustainable, leading to a failure. But it should be if we do not. Is that right? If we do not run our budget process effectively, then we may not be financially, instead of if we do. Yeah. And there's another one on number 7. There's we may fail to twice. Just a little thing.
Yeah, kind of a little bit to Josh's point. I'm not really broadly in favour of recalibration. Listening to you're reinterpreting what we used to consider moderate or minor to now be moderate. But when we made those judgments based on what was on the sheets, it was written down what minor meant and what moderate meant, and people made a judgment based on what the definition was. So I'm not that comfortable with just moving the whole category over. I think if that's what people said, then that's probably what they meant. And it might have been a reflection of the fact that generally when you're trying to put emphasis on something, it's because you think that there's work to do, right? And that you're uncomfortable with, the potential to deviate from what your plan is, or for the risk to eventuate. I think for me personally, if the tolerance, for example, in people is minor, but we know that in reality we've got far higher turnover, or we might lose key people, etc., then it's not the fact that we're prepared to tolerate moderate, it's that we want more emphasis on making it minor. So yeah, I think the risk matrix is doing two things. It's capturing our appetite, but it's also trying to focus our energy. So I think it probably depends a little bit on which lens you're looking through as to what it's talking to.
You're there to take notice. Now, in dealing with that, risk is the same across the board. That's how I view it anyway, and maybe that's an old parts view, but risk is risk.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. That was exactly going to be the last point that I'd like to make, because Councillor Woolsnop is correct, and it was kind of what was fundamentally behind me questioning the recalibration was if we do take into consideration something like staff turnover, minor is 12 to 15, moderate is 15 to 17. You know, if minor had been ticked by staff and councillors during that, then we'd kind of be thinking that. However, I do take the point that these are dynamic and we need to keep an eye on them all the time, because what's minor, the minor level of 12 to 15 might end up becoming moderate, and we might be making it even lower in terms of minor. So what I would like to see coming back is that recognition that actually there were some that we did kind of go minor, and to kind of come back to us, and when those recalibrations do happen, to kind of go, well, you know, this is kind of what happened in the workshop. This is where we want it to be in terms of consistency, to be able to make it practical to apply, and this is where we've landed. As long as that stuff is coming back across this way, then I think I'll be satisfied with that.
Just page 43, we've got risk owners identified, and we've got a couple of them identified as Andrew White and Kata Kohiri. So perhaps the risk owner should be by position rather than name.
Absolutely. That's it was an early draft on my part. So
Be updated. And there's still a few that are unassigned. TBC. So
yeah, that was yes.
Madam Chair, that point was raised last time we had this paper in front of us.
yes, where we said there were quite a few TBC.
And names of people in there.
Okay. There are no more questions. Do I have a mover for, it's just a noting, it's not a noting. Approve the council's approve the council's key 13 strategic risks as outlined in attachment 2, and approve the council's risk consequence matrix as included in attachment 3. Do I have a mover for this paper from our committee? Thank you, Councillor Foster. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Cranston. All in favour?
Right.
Contrary? Carried. Thank you, Steve, and we look forward to seeing you at our next risk update with this report. Thank you. Okay, next we move to GHL statement of intent, which we have seen several times before. Working.
62.
So we're on page 62.
Sorry, Your Worship, just if I may, in terms of the
Let's share this.
recommendation, should be approves to the council. Right. Recommends to council that it approves the statement of intent.
So this committee is just recommending that this goes to council for adoption by everyone. So any questions in regards to the statement of intent? You can see the notes that were added. I noted that GHL complied with what we asked of them the last time and agreed to that. So there are no issues that are contentious. Councillor Seymour. Moved by councillor Seymour. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Sheldrake. All in favour? This is what Nadine just said. All in favour? Contrary? Carried. Coral, you have that wording, so this is a recommendation to council to adopt. Thank you. And just part of the statement of intent, I was going to mention it, that there are a few, part of this is us working with our CCTO with a section 17 review to make sure we're all on the same page, we know what our different tasks are. So it's an exciting time for us to make sure, just like the local government review or the Three Waters review, to make sure we've got all our ducks in a row, we are well aligned, because it's so important that we all waka in the same direction. Let us see. Yes. Bruce did ask a few questions, but he did ask, I should have read this out before. Thank you, Councillor Cranston, for reminding me. He did ask about our gearing ratio, shareholders' funds to assets at 75%, which appears quite conservative for a commercial organisation. He just made observations, not really questions. And then also, the effective sale of any land is defined as a major transaction. I'm not certain how often this is triggered, nearly never, but it could be a bit restrictive. So can you comment on those two comments, observations from Bruce, please?
First one, the 75% or 25% debt ratio is low. It is low for commercial. We have seen that within, and there are opportunities to perhaps looking at that, because that's where the profitability comes from, very low deductibility of interest. But that's a process that they are also working through, and as we go through the review is what is the benchmark of other commercial entities in the same sort of situation. The second part, that effective land sale or any land is considered a major transaction, that is required by us for the Public Works Act. Any of the land that they may have been transferred to them may have some processes that we have to go back and actually have a look to see if there's any interest. So that is required as part of the whole system. Yes.
So the interest coverage ratio has gone from 11 to 4. I mean, 4 is still quite satisfactory, but it is a big movement. So I just wondered if there was, you know, with interest rates going up or anything like that, and more funding, that's going to jump that more. So are we getting into a danger? Well, why such a big jump? You know?
I think it was, they had a low, very low, even though it was say 20, they're actually probably only 10% of the debt, and so now they're just reflective of what it has moved to, and they've also got probably, that's been part of the process that we'll get. Their times coverage is still quite conservative with regards to it. I would think that they're well above that, but they're using that as a sort of a measure.
Yeah, it's just quite significant movement, but it's not concerning.
And then just the last observation from Bruce. On accounting policies, I assume that GHL is well aware that they must also fit within our group accounting policies, given the probable need for accounting adjustments to enable us to report as a public benefit entity. So they are well aware of that?
Yes, they are, and we do that as part of the consolidation.
Thank you. Any other questions in regards? I know we've already moved and passed it. Any, Councillor Seymour, do you have a question?
One of their conversations, because we've always kept a low debt level,
yes.
But now that they're consolidating, and they made that point this morning, you know, been able to do a lot of investment to date out of cash, but you know, in the future they may need to borrow. But if they sell some of that site, then they'll have some cash to do this. So that's a conversation I think that can be had. The other two are perfectly reasonable, and then if they want to change it next year, they will.
Good. Yeah, and like you say, there's an annual opportunity to adjust or to talk to us and say, this is where we're going. What do you think? Coral, have we voted on this? We've passed this one. So it's moved by councillor Seymour. Seconded by page 62, Coral.
Oh, 83. Oh, no, sorry, I'm on the next paper. 60. My apology.
Seconded by councillor Sheldrake. All in favour?
Aye.
Contrary, carried. Thank you for that. Okay, let's welcome Dave to our meeting. Welcome, Dave. I see you've been watching the live stream, which is not that live today. So you walked in just 1 minute in time, which is fabulous. So as you know, Dave is our health and safety guru / specialist. Welcome, Dave. Please take a seat and thank you. You can take our report, the report that you've written to us. You can take this as read, and then maybe you can have a short talk to us, and then there might be some questions around shaving your beard.
Correct, that's right. Thanks very much. Kia ora, everybody. Through the chair, just a few things in relation to the report and also addressing some of Bruce's questions that came through earlier this morning. So an update on critical risks. I love my notes. I've got the Dam Williams Grill. I mean the Williams Dam Grill. So there's one critical risk that needs to be signed off still. That's waiting for the right level at the dam and the contractors to do this specialist work. The grills have been made, but we just need to get the right timing. So that one's been on the list and it's still on the list. And that's the last critical risk that we have to write off, other than continued work with contractors, which we've alluded to in previous reports. The importance of managing contractors is very important. Risk, main risks, we allude to the report. Occupational health is a big one for us and for work safety and across the country. Specifically respiratory protective equipment. 700 people die from work-related deaths over every year, compared to about 70 that die at the acute deaths. So that's taking in asbestos, silicon, isocyanates, etc. Workplace exposure that can actually kill you later in life. So there's a big focus now on respiratory protection equipment. The teams that probably aligned to this are the pool team, where they use chlorine, and the water treatment teams that use chlorine. Chlorine's a pretty nasty chemical, so we need to make sure that's managed well. Also, the garden teams with glyphosate, we know about that as well. On top of the, so you'll have seen the risks that were managed in that. Sorry about that, let's just train of thought. Mental health and well-being. We've all seen the communications on television, social media. Government under a lot of pressure. Mike King giving his back his medal, etc. Mental health and well-being is pretty key to us in the council, and so we are actually focusing on it. And in fairness, we've been focused on it for a fair bit of time to try and get some traction around looking after our staff and making sure their health and well-being is totally supported. Covered that very well at the last meeting, I understand. And also referring to the Monarchy Tarifiti as well. Got some good support out there. Worker engagement and participation continues to be very important to us and part of the key part of the health and safety at work legislation. Worker engagement relies on leadership, managers, supportive managers and supportive leadership, and accountability and overall organizational culture. We're working well on this, and I think we've got some good initiatives coming through the council to help support this. As agreed, our focus should be all on our controls. If you look back to the report, we said at the last time we will actually look at the controls that we have in place for key risks. One of the key risks that we've had and we continue to have, if you look at the graphs, is abuse and conflict involving staff members. Pat covered this last time. We've had a significant increase in the last 3 months since the March meeting, and specifically in the last 2 weeks, I think there's been a real big spike. The worrying trend is it's not just in one team where the expectation is the parking enforcement, animal control guys. We've seen it with customer services, we've seen it with City Watch, and we've seen it at the library. So we have seen a big spike in conflict, verbal abuse to staff, and this can have a detrimental effect to their health and well-being going forward, which we know. So following on from the last report, we've put some proactive and reactive controls, if you've read through those, to say we've acknowledged this as a key risk. What are our controls and how do we manage this as far as reasonably practical? And you'll see engaging competent staff, flagging known properties or individuals. Body cams have been very useful, calling the police, trespassing individuals from public facilities, attending pairs where possible, training COA and de-escalation OPSEC training, been very valuable, and documented procedures. Those are all proactive things we can do. The reactive stuff is the EAP, when it's too late, looking after and supporting our guys.
So Dave, why do you think, because I wrote here and Bruce made a comment as well on the trend, the upward trend,
Yep.
and you just say it is going up. Why? Why do you think we are, because what we are addressing is not really the why, what we are addressing now is how we deal with it. I'm just interested, I'm not saying anyone is doing anything wrong, it's just interesting that there are just much more conflict. Maybe people are stressed out by the uncertain times we live in, and there's just a little bit more conflict there. It would be interesting to know why, with all those teams, especially our lovely library team, I can imagine our animal control sometimes are in situations where emotions are running high, the same, maybe the parking meters, but you would think, and even City Watch, but in the library, it's interesting to see that the temperatures clear there as well.
Yeah,
and more in the last few months.
Absolutely. And this is also reflected by our key contractors. We have regular meetings with the likes of waste management and rec services. They're all saying the same things. Also GoBus, they've had a spike of an increase in abuse and threats on public transport, as well as rec services as well. So it's not peculiar to Gisborne District Council. It's not peculiar to Gisborne District Council or libraries. It's cross nationwide.
So people are stressed out and anxious about the times.
Can I also add to that, that there is currently a number of issues that we are seeing from the chief executives across the sector around their engagement with public at public meetings. They're becoming more abusive to staff, and so they're looking at measures around how do you protect staff from going into those situations. So people don't wake up to go to meetings and be abused, and that's what they're finding, that the verbal abuse has been increasing. Yeah.
Councillor Faulkner.
Yeah, raises an interesting issue that I have been pondering for some time, and I'm sure everybody around this table at various times has pondered also, is what do we look at and what do other councils do in the way of support for their elected members? Because we're quite good at copying the firing line too, and it's not why we signed on. I mean, you expect a certain amount of it when you're dealing with the public engagement side of things. So is it something that has come up across CEOs or mayoral forums where we are dealing with society under, it seems, under more stress right now? You know, we're not going to get good people putting their hands up for these roles. How do we manage that?
Well, discussions with other mayors.
Do we provide training, and there's some really good people who give quite specific training in diffusing those situations. Like some of them you're never going to diffuse, especially if someone's on P and you're trying to give them a parking ticket, you know, you're not going to diffuse that. But there are particularly when maybe you're front of staff, you know, and you've on a day-to-day basis getting people come in who potentially have, you know, got a bill that they can't pay or something like that. Do we train specifically for taking the heat out of those conversations? Because if you see someone who's really good at it, it's phenomenal. Yeah, how
Through the chair, yes, we do. We use a good company. There are fear-free. There's several good companies. We use OPSEC. The challenge we find is we have quite a high staff turnover in certain areas within the council. So this is quite expensive training. So we do the de-escalation training, as it's called, and it's really valuable. We do that for all teams, but we have to continually monitor how we're doing it, looking at turnover of staff, new people come in all the time, people are leaving. So we just need to continue that ongoing training for de-escalation to make people move away and de-escalate rather than actually get involved. But it is becoming more difficult. I've been out with the teams myself on the roads with the parking, etc. And I know they do a really good job. They do try and de-escalate, and but they come against people that you just can't reason with, and that's quite a challenge for the guys out there. So yes, it's a battle, but it's a battle we're working with.
So yeah, supplementary that, like in terms of priority, I mean, between threats and abuse of staff and criminal activity, which I presume is kind of related to the first one, I would hope, it's almost, well, it is basically the same as all the other incidents combined. So it's pretty clear where our consistent and persistent risks are.
Yeah, and I can actually, it's perfect timing actually to go back onto Bruce's questions in relation to two questions he put on the health and safety. The first one was the frequency of events, which we've alluded to on page 89 of that. It's worth discussing. It certainly is. The March report said 32 vehicle accidents. This report says 36. So I think we consistently know that vehicles and driving is a risk to the council, and we're aware of that and we drive carefully. The abuse has gone from 26 to 43. It's almost doubled in the space of 3 months, which is again reflected in the content of the report. The frequency changes are the tail end of the COVID recovery for the 12 months running frequencies, April to May last year. An increase in focus across teams of reporting near misses. We're trying to encourage people to report and give the importance of reporting near misses. So we've actually put some more effort into encouraging people to report. So we're seeing more reporting. And an increase in events, as alluded to in the report, especially specifically in relation to conflict and abuse. So there has been an increase in those events. Paragraph 31, further collaboration, communication, and support to siloed system. I left out the Olympic pool complex. We have quite a bit of abuse in there, the lower level end, but some of those haven't been reported. And I think we need to ensure that we report when the threshold meets that reporting threshold. Yeah, sorry. And then whilst we've seen an increase in the lead indicators, that was the second point that Bruce raised. There is a lot of work to be ongoing. The lead indicators are being proactive, observations, near misses, etc. And that initiates to improve the health and safety buy-in and culture across council. And that's something we're continually working on. In addition to that, we collaborate with BOCLAS. So we feel we're focused in the right areas. We're looking at other councillors to see what they're actually incurring, coming face to face with. So we feel that we are actually focused in the right area and looking at the right areas from a health and safety risk to keep you guys safe and our staff.
So when we employ people here, are they given any initial training before they go out? So they are given that.
Yes, Terry. One of the first points was engage competent people. When we've got somebody for City Watch, it'd be good if they were a security guard or something on those lines, and they've already got some familiarization. Doesn't always happen, but we do a thorough induction process and we do initial training.
Councillor Foster and then Councillor.
Yeah, just to change the subject, or it's on here, it's about the beard shaving. I was just like, oh my goodness, are we going to discriminate against people with beards in these situations or with respiratory, or do we advise of what their consequences could be now that this has been identified as a hazard?
Yeah, good one, Larry. No, we're not going to discriminate about people. We've known about this for some time. This is just a focus from WorkSafe. Specifically, people working where you need respiratory equipment, like the likes of the people that are exchanging chlorine, they need to be clean shaven. It's always been the case. It's no different now. If you're doing a job where you're going to need respiratory protection, you can't have a beard. So you won't see any asbestos providers or people with competency with beards, because that is bottom line. It's ineffective if you've got a beard to have respiratory equipment. But no, we're not going to be vindictive. We'll just tailor to make sure we've got the right people doing the right job safely.
Chair, just a couple of questions around page 91 of the report. A notifiable event, I assume, is a much bigger event than notifiable incident. Is that what you're telling us?
Notifiable events include notifiable incidents and notifiable accidents.
Well,
So
if you read 34, 35 and 36, it tells us there's no WorkSafe notifications in the past 12 months at 34. And at 36, workplace have been informed of health and safety concerns. I'm just trying to...
Yep, no, that's a fair point. Notifiable events are the higher level instance.
That's what I assumed. Okay, so let me...
Contractors report then direct to, they notify WorkSafe directors, contractors. We're aware of that, but we have had no notifications from cancelled work. The
Right.
final report under 36, I think that, I'm sorry.
36, yeah.
36, I think that is something we might need to discuss, but we have had
That's what I was asking,
some
to ask about.
complaints or some allegations from members that working at the pool facility in relation to worker engagement and health and safety at the pool,
And
which is
that's
under
what I would like to
investigation.
say. I think that we should have it, the report should be in a bit more depth, because we constantly at a governance level, no matter what our organisation is, reminding us that the governors of the organisation are ultimately responsible. So the council's initiated an independent investigation and recommendations are presently under review. Are you in a position to give us any more information about that now?
Probably tomorrow I would be, but not today. I'm just dealing with legal. I'm just, we're just at that final point, so not at this stage.
Right. And, yes, and I just want to ask a more general question, because it doesn't seem to be covered here. Are the issues of bullying within the organisation brought to your attention very often?
Bullying, stress and fatigue is all part of the requirements to report. I am aware of incidents with stress and fatigue, but I've not been aware of any bullying incidents since I've been here. Yeah. Good.
So how many incidents of stress and fatigue then have you got under review at the moment?
There is a couple, I'd say there's probably two. But yeah, I think there's two at the moment.
Fine, thanks. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, David, for this report. Just a couple of questions from me. Just respect that all behaviour is communication to some degree. Of course, we appreciate if people weren't so abusive in their communication. So do we get the data, if we're going to be on a trajectory to changing bad behaviours in the process of collecting bad people feel not listened to, that the job wasn't done when they were told it would be. Do we get that kind of, feedback in the abuse situation? Obviously, we're trying to keep it calm and all that, but so that we know that we can, I guess, do our part to fix or to lessen the stress coming at our workers, etc. So do we collect all that, the reason behind the abuse and all that, but do we have a process where we go back to them to say, look, we understand you were stressed, frustrated, because knowing this district, I've been here all my life, there is a lot of stress. There's a lot of homelessness. There's a lot of drug taking. There's a lot of issues in a social framework that are leading to huge stresses in public places. So mitigating those, what's our role to going back to, I mean, obviously if it's a one-off incident of someone having a rant, but what do we do to in a process to send the message that, look, we get it. We too feel that frustration, that stress. Is there an upward framework to say to government, we're seeing the rise, we're seeing, you know, so overall in this space, what do we do in it to, you know, send a message that, you know, we won't tolerate it, because our staff deserve and should be safe at all times and all those in this space. But what's our role to, you know, the process?
For your worship, part of it is exactly what you're saying, is that sending the clear message that you support staff, that they shouldn't, you know, that they shouldn't be abused in what they're doing, but also role model that behaviour as well. I think it's the role of the chief executive to look after staff wellbeing, health and safety. We have currently, we've undertaken a wellbeing survey to assess where our staff are at and look at some initiatives that we can put in place to support them if there are, where there are or if there are issues. That information will come back to you in one of our sessions as to where our staff are at. But we have a number of policies that we've put in place for staff, things like our flexible working arrangement that helps them if they need to. We have leave arrangements, we have EAP, so there's a bundle of support services available for our staff where there is stress related issues. But yeah, I will share with you when we've completed our survey results and the initiatives that we're putting in place to support our staff.
Thanks, Nadine. I guess because, as you say, we are elected and we will have people come at us who then want us to go to the staff through the mechanisms we have to say, why did this happen, without us saying we oppose or agree respect to our role and respecting staff. So I appreciate that report. My second question was, in respect to identifying a hazard like staff needing to wear respiratory more, you know, akin to the safety messages that are happening, if we identify a high risk, be it using, I can't even say the word glyphosate. Is it glyphosate? So would we look at a mechanism to no longer use that product, or would we, to mitigate the issues that public bring to our attention, because we're trying to use a product that works, but it's causing concerns, be it later on in life. So do we say, let's no longer use that product and look for something better, et cetera, when we identify? Yeah.
Through the chair, an excellent question again. One of the key hierarchies, elimination is the first thing you do. Glyphosate is one of those on, can we eliminate? If we can't eliminate, then we need to isolate and then go down the hierarchy to personal protective equipment, which is what we do. Absolutely, we've been looking for an alternative that works, an organic-based weed killer that will do the same job. Bill will probably know that there's been a lot coming to the market, but they just don't cut the mustard. And at the moment, we're still remaining to go with glyphosate, which has been classified as a known carcinogen, as along with red meat. So it's we manage it well and we look after our staff. And at the moment, we're still using glyphosate. Dr. Murray Cave has done a recent real strong report on glyphosate. Absolutely. If we can eliminate any high risks, that's the first port of call.
It's curious, having listened to all this, is it common occurrence for our staff to get abused? I mean, does it happen on a regular basis?
Through the chair, regular, we've got how many incidents? 42 over a 12-month period. That's getting on for one a week. For the parking enforcement team, they get quite regularly abused. You could understand that. The level of abuse is to the F-off, to the quite considerable threats of violence. So they can be desensitized and don't report everything because they get those kind of comments about what are you doing, get a real job, etc., etc. So I would say it's not that frequent or common, but it's coming up on our report that it's more common than it should be. And talking to the teams, Tuesdays and Thursdays seem to be the key days.
I can understand the parking officers and our livestock officers, but outside of that sphere, is it quite common too?
More recently, it's increased. Customer services, the contractors have also said that the Go Bus, for instance, the rec services and waste management guys have also been subject to some conflict and abuse from members of the public, which is a worrying trend.
Thank you.
Yes, so I just wanted, so we've got a suite of things that we report on, but exposure to chemicals and unprotected exposure to aerosols is not one of the things that we're capturing in that data, even though it's been talked about quite a bit here. So I just wonder if maybe that's a classification that is buried in the existing classifications somewhere. But also just I'd like to, I guess, caution everything has a risk element to it, and glyphosate, which has a similar toxicity to meat, is probably not particularly helpful, really. I think there's probably a whole suite of chemicals that we use that are proven and scientifically, determined by our Environmental Protection Agency to be far higher priority for elimination. So just, because these forums are public, it's some risk to us declaring war on glyphosate. Cheers.
And I want to thank you, Dave, for a very thorough report, and thank you, Nadine, for making sure our staff are safe. That is one of our most important jobs, to make sure people that we employ come to work and they go home, they're not physically or mentally damaged. So we support you in that work, and as employers ourselves, all of you also committed to looking after your physical well-being. All in favour?
Aye.
Councillors, I just quickly want